The splitting headache had been a dull throb, a minor distraction in the suffocating dry heat of the Sacramento apartment. Then Chloe's left hand, the one holding the worn copy of the American Journal of Medicine, seized up, scattering pages across the sun-drenched oak floor. My blood ran instantly cold, a visceral, sickening rush that bypassed logic. I lunged for the phone, my thumb already hovering over 911. This was it. This was what I had known was coming. The dark intuition my family had mocked for years. "Don't, Liam." Her voice, usually sharp and sarcastic, was a slurred gravel. Her eyes, normally piercing green, were wide pools of panic and confusion, yet still managed to convey the immense weight of the bet we'd made 2 days prior. "I swear to God, if you call them, I'll never forgive you." The impossible choice wasn't between saving her life and respecting her wishes. It was between upholding her trust and confronting my deepest, most agonizing fear, the fear of being wrong. My entire life was dictated by my frantic, over-analytical mind, and Chloe, my pragmatic, painfully grounded older sister, had called it my fatal flaw, the desperate need for external validation. I couldn't trust my own gut unless someone else verified the danger, and she knew it. She had leveraged that weakness in our ridiculous, desperate wager. I had 48 hours to stop overreacting to every minor symptom, or she would claim the full $800 I had saved for my upcoming college applications. "Your face is drooping, Chloe," I whispered, watching the corner of her mouth betraying the severity of the incident. It wasn't the throbbing migraine she'd claimed. This felt seismic. She struggled to lift her head, her effort pulling beads of sweat down her temple. "Water, just the heat." "Don't start, Liam." We agreed. "If you panic now, you lose the money. Just drive me to the urgent care in Folsom. Do not call 911. The bet was the hook. My deep-seated insecurity was the chain. The moment the apartment door slammed behind us, the heat of the California afternoon hitting my face like a physical blow, I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 2:15 p.m. "Fine, urgent care," I conceded, sliding the key into the ignition. I drove faster than I dared, but the specialist hospital was across the city, requiring a risky drive through the winding, clogged freeways of the state capital. If the symptoms returned or worsened, the local doctor had warned her months ago, "You have exactly 145 minutes to reach a neurological unit, or the damage will be catastrophic." That clock was ticking now, not on my wallet, but on her ability to function. I had already wasted 5 minutes arguing. It is terrifying, the power a single dismissive voice can hold over a person whose anxiety already whispers constant doubts. The air conditioning struggled against the relentless Sacramento sun, pushing hot, tired air into the cabin. Chloe leaned her head against the passenger window, her breathing shallow, the sound a faint, uneven rasp. Every red light we hit, and in the sprawl of California, they were ceaseless, was a fresh spike of adrenaline and self-recrimination in my chest. If I had simply overridden her, if I had trusted the ice in my veins telling me stroke, we'd be meeting the paramedics in minutes, not fighting the endless gridlock towards some under-equipped urgent care center. "See? I'm fine," Chloe mumbled, her tongue catching on the F. She tried a thin smile, but it only accentuated the subtle, terrifying droop on the left side of her face. "Just really dehydrated. I told you, Liam. You turn everything into a crisis." She ran her fingers through her hair, but the movement was weak, uncoordinated. Her usual biting certainty, the characteristic that had always anchored me despite my irritation, was dissolving into genuine, visible frailty. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles shone white, turning off the main artery and plunging into a narrow side street hoping to shave off time. This suburban road was a blur of identical bungalows, baked dry by the intense heat unique to this part of the state, deep in the heart of the most populated area of the western United States. I desperately needed her to validate my fear, to look at me and say, "You're right. Call 911. But her continued denial was permission to keep second-guessing myself. The money was a moot point now, but the public humiliation of calling an ambulance for a simple migraine terrified the part of me defined by anxious perfectionism. It is remarkable how the desire to not appear foolish can compete with the primal instinct for survival. I pulled out my phone again, placing it on the console. "We have maybe 35 minutes left, Chloe. That urgent care center isn't equipped for neurological intervention. If this gets worse on the table, they'll have to call an ambulance anyway, and we'll have lost precious time waiting for one to arrive from the nearest major hospital. I risked a quick glance. She had closed her eyes. Her skin was a frightening shade of ashen gray, a color that signaled emergency far louder than any alarm bell. "Don't yell," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the drone of the air filter. "I hate when you get like this." That sentence, designed to trigger my defensive retreat, hit its mark perfectly. I swallowed the protest that rose in my throat. I muted the internal siren. I kept driving toward the urgent care, obeying her wishes, even though every cell in my body screamed that this detour was a fatal mistake, caused solely by my relentless self-doubt. The irony was suffocating. My fear of being judged as overreacting was preventing the necessary, actual overreaction. The urgent care clinic was a sterile, brightly lit box nestled in a strip mall, smelling faintly of old disinfectant and institutional coffee. The moment the automatic doors slid open, revealing a tired-looking woman behind the glass partition, I knew we had failed. Obstaculo 1. Desafio pratico. This was not the place. The waiting room was already packed with the mundane illnesses of the Central Valley. A child with a hacking cough, an elderly man clutching his knee, the normal, non-life-threatening ailments that made my emergency seem theatrical. I practically carried Chloe to the counter, her weight dragging my arm down. "My sister," I managed, my voice tight. "Sudden onset severe headache, left-sided weakness, facial droop. We need to see a doctor immediately. It might be a stroke." The receptionist, clearly immune to panic, barely glanced up from her monitor. "Insurance card, please, and fill out these forms. Wait, time is approximately 45 minutes. She gestured vaguely toward a clipboard full of fine print regarding privacy policies and copays. 45 minutes? My throat seized. "We don't have 45 minutes. We've already spent 20 minutes getting here." My hands started trembling violently, the physical manifestation of the rising panic I had tried so hard to suppress to appease Chloe. I looked at my sister, slumped in a hard plastic chair, her lips slightly blue. Her chest was barely moving. It is a peculiar torture, this moment when bureaucratic indifference collides with acute, biological terror. I snatched the clipboard, the metal edge biting into my palm. I started scribbling her name and date of birth, fighting the impulse to throw the papers and demand a doctor. Chloe reached out a shaky hand, catching my wrist. The texture of her cold, clammy skin was alarming. "Don't make a scene, Liam. Please, just wait." The word, wait, was a low, desperate plea, a final attempt to enforce the normalcy she craved, even as her body was betraying her. A young woman in blue scrubs, a nurse practitioner, emerged carrying a stack of files. I dropped the clipboard and stepped directly into her path. "Ma'am, I need you to look at my sister. Now. This is not a migraine. Look at her mouth. Look at her coordination." My voice was too loud, echoing off the linoleum floor. The room grew silent. I could smell the stale sweat and anxiety rolling off me. I knew I sounded exactly like the paranoid alarmist they all expected me to be. The nurse, visibly annoyed by the disruption, frowned and finally looked at Chloe. She sighed, her frustration palpable. "Sir, we are backed up. Fill out the forms, and we'll run a basic workup. We can check her blood pressure and maybe run an EKG. But if it's neurological, we'll have to stabilize her and transfer her to Mercy General anyway." She was validating the severity of the symptoms, but simultaneously confirming the complete inadequacy of this facility, a practical defeat inflicted by my need for validation. I had delayed the transfer by 25 minutes for the sake of avoiding an argument. I was ushered, or rather, forced to remain, in the small, dim triage room, while the nurse practitioner attempted to take Chloe's vitals. The sterile paper covering the cot rustled noisily every time Chloe shifted, a harsh counterpoint to the distant, rhythmic beep, beep, beep of a machine monitoring an unseen patient next door. The air in the tiny room was thin, carrying the faint metallic scent of blood and sanitizer. I stood rigid against the wall, my hands shoved deep into my pockets, watching the scene unfold like a disaster movie, where I was the only witness. The NP struggled to find a good vein in Chloe's unresponsive left arm. "We need to get some fluids in her," the NP muttered, more to herself than to me. "Blood pressure is elevated, but not dangerously high. She needs a CT scan," I insisted, crossing my arms. In the last 5 minutes, she's stopped answering my questions clearly. She's getting worse. The clock in my head flashed, 30 minutes remaining. The urgency had morphed into a desperate dread, heavy and constant. Liam, relax, Chloe managed to choke out, her eyes flickering open. She looked utterly exhausted. Stop pushing them. I'm just tired. I lose. She was trying to concede the bet, to give me the validation I craved, but the moment was too far gone. The money meant nothing if it cost her everything else. It is a common human reflex, minimizing the danger, even when it is staring you down, to avoid acknowledging the lack of control. The NP finally managed to insert the IV, a sharp hiss escaping Chloe's lips. We've called Mercy General. They are on standby. We're waiting for the ambulance to transport her. It should be here in 15 to 20 minutes. My heart lurched. 20 minutes. 20 minutes waiting for an ambulance that would then have to drive across Sacramento through traffic to the specialist hospital. That meant, best case scenario, she would arrive 10 minutes after the critical 45-minute window closed. I looked down at Chloe, and the reality of the situation solidified into physical pain. Her fear was gone, replaced by a frighteningly placid acceptance. I ran my thumb over the back of her cold, dry hand. I should have called 911 immediately, I whispered, the words tasting like ash. I listened to you because I was afraid of being wrong. You wouldn't have called. Anyway, she slurred, her words slow. Too expensive. Too dramatic. The subtle implication of her statement struck me like a physical blow. She didn't just bet on my anxiety. She bet on my frugality, on the ingrained working-class fear of medical debt common throughout the United States. She thought I was too careful with the college money to risk an unjustified ambulance bill. The profound betrayal wasn't hers, but my own for allowing that fear to supersede logic. The dilemma was now stark, painful, and immediate. The NP had stepped out to update the waiting ambulance service. I had perhaps 15 minutes before the transport arrived. If I waited, Chloe risked permanent damage. If I drove her myself, I risked exacerbating the injury on the road, or worse, getting stuck in traffic and arriving with no medical support waiting. This was Obstaculo 2, Dilemma Morale, Reversão 1. I looked at the small metal shelf near the door. There was a bright red emergency bag, clearly marked with basic trauma supplies. I had taken 2 semesters of EMT training before my anxiety made me question every career path. I knew how to stabilize and monitor. The hospital was 12 miles away. A gamble against the clock and the rules. Liam, Chloe's breathing hitched. Where are you going? I'm taking you, I said, moving decisively, my mind finally clearing of the cloud of self-doubt. My need for validation evaporated, replaced by cold, absolute necessity. I grabbed a thermal blanket and carefully wrapped it around her shoulders. We can't wait 20 minutes for a ride. The NP re-entered just as I unhooked Chloe's IV from the stand. She gasped. You can't do that. You are endangering your sister and disrupting treatment. You wait for the ambulance. The ambulance won't make it in time, I stated, lifting Chloe into my arms with surprising ease. Her body was light, too light. We've lost 30 minutes already because I listened to her. Not another second. The texture of the paper gown against my arm felt thin, fragile. I could smell the sharp, coppery scent of her rising fever. It is a sudden freedom, the moment you realize that the judgment of others means nothing compared to the imminent loss. I strode past the startled NP and the shocked receptionist, bursting through the automatic doors. The California sunlight felt blinding, the blast of hot air overwhelming. As I settled Chloe gently into the back seat, securing her with the seatbelt, her left side dragging slightly, I heard the NP shouting behind me, threatening to call the police. I ignored the distant sound of her anger, focusing only on the ticking of the internal clock. Reversion 1. The belief that the urgent care was actively helping was false. Their intervention only served to waste the precious few minutes she had left before the threshold of irreversible damage. The time I thought I was buying was actually spent in a queue. I slammed the door and jumped into the driver's seat. My hands, which had been shaking 5 minutes ago, were now steady, fueled by pure, desperate adrenaline. 15 minutes remaining. Maximum. I needed to average 48 miles per hour through the city at 3 p.m. It was nearly impossible. The drive was a blur of sun-baked asphalt and aggressive lane changes. I took the State Route 99 entrance, weaving perilously through the afternoon rush-hour traffic, the horn blaring in protest as I cut off a delivery van. Every brake light ahead felt like a physical blow to my gut. The sound of the engine roaring was deafening, the only music the frantic thump of my own pulse. "Are you okay, Chloe? Stay with me," I shouted, glancing in the rearview mirror. She didn't respond immediately. Her head had rolled slightly toward the window, her features slack. The color was entirely gone from her cheeks. The plastic smell of the car interior, mixed with the faintly sweet, cloying odor of sickness, made my stomach turn. Then, a faint, ragged cough. "Liam, stop. I can't stop. I have to get you to Mercy General. It's the only place in this part of California that has the right equipment." I checked the navigation screen. 8 minutes to destination. But the traffic was condensing into a solid, unmoving knot around an overturned tanker truck just ahead. The universe possesses a cruel sense of dramatic timing, ensuring that the critical path is always the most congested. I slammed on the brakes, the seatbelt biting into my shoulder. The sudden halt was sharp enough that the thermal blanket slipped off Chloe's shoulders. I leaned back and tried to touch her. Her skin was now alarmingly hot, the subtle texture of clamminess replaced by dry heat. "The lock," she managed, her voice impossibly small. "The lockbox." I froze. The lockbox. She kept a small, black metal lockbox under the driver's seat. It held her emergency asthma inhaler, her high school yearbook, and a piece of paper I hadn't been allowed to look at since she turned 18. She always said it contained her last will and testament, a morbid joke she loved to make. "What about the lockbox, Chloe? Tell me," I urged, fighting the urge to throw the car into reverse and try to drive illegally onto the shoulder. "The papers, in case..." Her eyes rolled back slightly. The clock ticking was now a tangible pressure on my eardrums. We were 5 minutes away, but completely immobile. 7 minutes remaining. My focus shattered. I had to choose. Continue fighting the gridlock that would certainly make me miss the 45-minute window, or look in the box she now seemed desperate for me to open. My need for control was being challenged by a greater, final instruction from her. With a curse swallowed deep in my throat, I wrenched the lockbox from beneath the seat, scraping my knuckles on the metal runner. The small, cold box felt heavy with history. It was locked with a 3-digit combination. "What's the combination, Chloe?" No answer. Her breathing was now little more than a whisper of air. I shook her shoulder gently. "Chloe, tell me the combination." I desperately cycled through numbers that held meaning for us. Our birth years, our old address, the year our father left. None of them worked. The traffic ahead remained solid. 5 minutes remaining. The realization hit me like a physical wave. This was Obstaculo 3, Acrisi Maxima. The failure wasn't the traffic. The failure was my falla fatale, the years of needing external validation that prevented me from seeing the obvious. I had been so obsessed with her skepticism and the public bet that I never took the time to truly know her secrets, assuming her life was as predictable as her sarcasm. I leaned back, my head resting on the steering wheel, the hard plastic biting my forehead. I could smell the stale gasoline fumes mixing with the oppressive dry heat outside. My mind raced, searching for the one number she would trust me with, something she valued, something I always mocked. The lockbox contained the last will and testament, yes, but it also contained something else. The last paper she had tried to show me, the one she'd pulled from the stack of medical journals before her hand seized up. I had waved it off, too busy lecturing her about her symptoms. We often mistake the act of caring for the act of listening. I looked back at her face, pale and distant. I remembered the fierce, protective pride she had in her diagnosis, the way she had argued with her cynical doctor about the best course of action months ago. The doctor was dismissive, but Chloe had found a second opinion, a specialist who believed in a rare, aggressive treatment plan for her arteriovenous malformation, AVM. She hadn't wanted to tell me because she knew I'd panic. Her combination. It wasn't sentimental. It was practical. It was the date of the successful treatment trial she'd researched. I closed my eyes and whispered the numbers she'd often cite with pride. 9-1-1-1. No, wait. She would never use the number I was so desperate to call. Then it hit me. The number the specialist used for the probability of success in the trial she pinned all her hopes on. It was a decimal, a percentage. 0.75. 750. My fingers, slick with sweat, rotated the dial. 750. Inside, beneath the stack of legal papers, was a small, folded piece of thick paper. It wasn't the will. It was a note, written in her hurried, sharp handwriting. Liam, call Dr. Patel at Mercy General, direct line 555-0911. Tell her the TPA window is closing. Tell her I refused 911 because I was scared of the cost, not you. I love you, idiot. Don't be afraid to be loud. The note was covered in a dried, sticky substance. Blood. She had written this weeks ago. My entire premise, the idea that she denied the emergency purely to win the bet or dismiss my anxiety, crumbled. She denied it because she couldn't afford the ambulance and was trying to protect my college fund. The final, devastating truth of her sacrifice was revealed, precisely when I was trapped, stationary, and running out of seconds. The raw, painful realization that she had manufactured the bet, and the denial not to hurt me, but to protect me from financial ruin, completely restructured my priority system. The shame of being called an overreactor vanished. I no longer sought external validation. I sought action. I shoved the lockbox under the passenger seat and snatched up my phone, my fingers flying across the keypad. I didn't try to call 911 again. I dialed the direct line, 555-0911. The phone rang twice before a crisp, professional voice answered. Dr. Patel's office. This is Nurse Kim. My name is Liam. My sister Chloe. I have her in my car, stuck in traffic on the 99, 5 minutes from Mercy General. She's suffering a severe cerebral bleed from an AVM. We are closing in on the 45-minute window for TPA administration. I spoke with the rapid-fire precision of someone who had practiced this speech in their head for years. Mr. Liam, we received an alert from the urgent care, but the ambulance is still en route. Forget the ambulance, I commanded, the sound of my own voice shaking with an authority I never knew I possessed. She needs the CT scan and TPA immediately. Her left side is unresponsive. She's fading fast. We are next to the Caltrans storage yard on the right before the exit ramp. I looked around desperately, searching for an alternative route off the freeway. The air smelled heavily of exhaust and hot asphalt. The mind, when stripped of ego, can perform feats of cold logic far superior to those clouded by doubt. Stay calm, Mr. Liam. Nurse Kim's voice was steadying. We are dispatching a security team to meet you. You are on the final approach into the city proper. Do you see an emergency shoulder? I pressed my face against the windshield, straining to see. There was a narrow, unpaved shoulder, usually reserved for disabled vehicles or maintenance crews, leading down a steep, dusty embankment toward a surface road. It was illegal, reckless, and the only path forward. I see it. I'm taking the shoulder now, I stated, not asking for permission. My foot slammed down on the accelerator. The car lurched violently, the tires spinning and spitting dry California dirt and gravel into the air. The sound was a loud, tearing roar. I heard Nurse Kim relaying instructions through the speaker. Security. He's taking the shoulder. Meet him at the 35th Street exit ramp. He will be coming in hot. I gripped the wheel, pushing the small sedan to its absolute limit down the treacherous, unpaved hill. The car rattled so violently I could feel my teeth ache. I glanced at Chloe. Her eyes were fully closed now. She was completely silent. 1 minute remaining. This was the climax, driven by a raw, unvalidated certainty that was the exact antithesis of my lifelong flaw. We hit the bottom of the embankment with a bone-jarring impact that sent the rearview mirror spinning. I wrestled the car onto the 35th Street access road, tires screeching in protest. The city sounds, the distant sirens, the incessant low hum of traffic, rushed back in. I had bypassed the worst of the congestion, but I was running on pure fumes and luck. I pushed the speed limit, blowing through a red light at an intersection, my eyes fixed on the hospital's looming structure ahead. 2 seconds later, 2 large black SUVs, marked with the Mercy General logo, cut sharply across traffic, blocking the street just ahead of the emergency entrance. They were here. I skidded to a stop right behind them. Before the engine had even completely died, the SUV doors flew open. 2 enormous security guards and 2 nurses in dark blue scrubs were rushing toward my car. The sound of their running feet slapping the pavement was the most comforting noise I had ever heard. "Back seat," I yelled, already fumbling with my sister's door. A nurse, brisk and professional, was beside me instantly, her movements precise. She had an oxygen mask ready. What time did the symptoms start? 2:15 p.m., I choked out. I looked at the clock on the dashboard. It was 3 p.m. exactly. 45 minutes. We had made it to the curb on the last possible second. The air, thick with anticipation, and the medicinal smell emanating from the open trauma bay doors, crackled with emergency. In moments of extreme duress, the human capacity for coordination can feel almost supernatural. They had Chloe on a gurney within seconds. As they wheeled her swiftly toward the massive sliding glass doors of the emergency department, Dr. Patel, a small woman with piercing dark eyes, stepped out. She held up a hand. "Wait." She looked directly at me. "You brought her? You are Liam?" I nodded, breathless, watching them administer oxygen and check her pupils with sharp lights. "Your sister is in a critical condition, Mr. Liam. The time is vital. I need you to know that without the TPA, she will suffer massive, irreversible damage." She paused, her expression unreadable. "You did the right thing by bypassing the ambulance delay. But I need to ask, why did she initially refuse medical care? And why did she wait until the last possible minute to share her medical information with you?" I stared at her, the lockbox note burning in my memory. The intense California sunlight reflecting off the polished hospital floors made my eyes water. "She was scared of the cost, doctor," I managed, the lie catching in my throat. "She was trying to protect my college savings." "Doctor?" Patel nodded slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line of understanding. "I will do everything I can. Now wait." The sliding doors hissed shut, taking Chloe and the entire emergency team away. I stood alone in the empty, overheated bay, my car still blocking the entrance, the engine ticking as it cooled. The next 6 hours stretched into an eternity defined by the smell of strong coffee and hospital linen. I sat on a rigid plastic chair in the surgical waiting area, staring blankly at the map of the hospital system on the wall, tracing the boundary lines of the state of California, where this entire catastrophe unfolded. I had given a statement to a kind but serious police officer about the illegal freeway driving, but he seemed mostly concerned about the overturned tanker and let me off with a stern warning. The anxiety that had been suppressed by adrenaline began to creep back, cold and insidious. I didn't try to contact anyone. My parents would only add chaos and blame, reinforcing the old narrative that I was prone to exaggeration. I needed the doctor's word, the definitive external validation that this was real, that I hadn't made a monumental mistake. When the world feels too big and threatening, silence becomes the only achievable form of control. A young resident finally approached me around 9 p.m., his face etched with fatigue. He confirmed the diagnosis, a hemorrhagic stroke due to a ruptured AVM, precisely as Chloe had feared. The TPA had been administered at 3:05 p.m., 5 minutes after, the precise 45-minute window suggested by some research, but fast enough to halt the immediate progression of the bleed. They had managed to stabilize her. "She survived the initial surgery," the resident said, fiddling with his stethoscope. "But Dr. Patel needs to speak to you. She's in recovery, but—" He hesitated, looking uncomfortable. I stood, my knees clicking. The sound was loud in the quiet hallway. But what? The bleed was extensive. The delay in treatment, even those critical 30 minutes at the urgent care, caused significant edema. I followed the resident down a maze of corridors, the polished floors reflecting the harsh fluorescent lights. Finally, Dr. Patel was waiting outside a room in the ICU. Her face was grave, all traces of rushed urgency replaced by a quiet, devastating certainty. "Mr. Liam, your speed saved her life. It was a victory against the clock, absolutely." She placed a hand on my arm. "But we found something during the surgery that your sister had kept hidden, even from the lockbox note, and it changes the prognosis. Reversion 2, the final, surprising revelation." "What is it?" I asked, my voice dry. The faint, high-pitched sound of the monitors in the ICU was the new, terrifying music. Chloe's AVM was not a single malformation. She had a cluster. She was born with a small second growth in the temporal lobe, one she knew about, but which her previous doctors missed. It hadn't bled, but it was aggressive. The shock of the first bleed triggered a secondary, smaller hemorrhage in that second AVM. We managed to clip the original rupture, but the second one, Dr. Patel swallowed hard. The second bleed, though smaller, was deeper. It affected the area of the brain responsible for higher motor function and short-term memory. The doctor continued, her words precise, shattering my fragile peace. The bet, the denial, the delay, it only worsened the first bleed. But the damage from the second hemorrhage, the hidden one, was independent. Even if you had called 911 at 2:15 p.m., she still would have suffered this severe motor function loss. You didn't cause her permanent injury, Liam. It was inevitable. Your fatal flaw of needing validation cost her 30 minutes of optimal recovery time, but it did not cause the ultimate permanent loss. The relief that I was not solely responsible for the permanent damage was instantly replaced by a deep, hollow ache caused by the fact of the damage itself. The doctor's precise language confirmed the custodia vittoria. She led me into the ICU room. The smell was powerfully antiseptic, masking the faint, lingering metallic scent of blood. Chloe was dwarfed by the massive bed, her head wrapped in thick white bandages. Wires trailed from her arms and chest, converging on the rhythmic, insistent monitors. She's stable, Liam, Dr. Patel said softly, but she has significant right-sided paralysis. And her memory, we don't know the extent of the impact on her short-term recall yet. I approached the bedside, my footsteps squeaking on the pristine floor. Her skin, where visible, was waxy and pale, but her chest rose and fell steadily, a small, continuous sound of life being stubbornly maintained. This was the victory. She was alive. I reached out and touched her left hand, the one that had betrayed her first. The texture of her skin was smooth and cool, unfamiliar. "Chloe?" I whispered. Her eyes fluttered open. They were still green, but unfocused. She tracked my face for a long moment, a confused frown creasing her brow. Who are you?" she asked, her voice raspy, uneven, but undeniably hers. My breath hitched. The loss was immediate and profound. It wasn't just the paralysis. It was the shared history, the years of sarcasm and rivalry and hidden affection, wiped clean by a catastrophic biological event. The cruelest betrayals are often those inflicted by biology, not by intent. I sat down heavily in the chair beside the bed, the rigid plastic digging into my hip. I took her hand again, fighting the urge to weep uncontrollably. I knew this wasn't her, not completely. The aggressive, cynical sister who taught me how to drive and made the impossible bet was gone, replaced by a frightened stranger in a hospital bed in Central California. "I'm Liam," I said, keeping my voice level. The lesson of not overreacting finally, permanently learned, but at an immeasurable cost. "I'm your brother. You made a bet with me." A faint flicker of recognition, or maybe just muscle memory, crossed her face. The bet? Did I win? I managed a thin, painful smile. "We both lost, Chloe, but you survived, and that's all that matters." The money was still in the bank, pristine and untouched. I would never use it for college now. It was for her physical therapy, for the long, agonizing road of recovery that lay ahead. She was alive, but the sister I knew was a permanent casualty. Sacrifice not to my anxiety, but to the brutal indifference of fate, only buffered by my desperate, unvalidated instinct. My instinct had saved her life, but it couldn't save her mind.